Marianne Demello-Smith, thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Junkies.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be
I'm
here.
a-
A little nervous, but excited.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and as we were just getting started, and maybe we can start there. Obviously, you've got experience interviewing podcasters on your show, Message in the Middle, and there's something to be said about feeling in control when you're the host and that you are in charge of the energy, the pace, and the direction of the conversations, which you've experienced. But it seems like I've had this happen a little bit to myself when I'm on shows as well. So I'm wondering if you can talk through what that's like being on the receiving end.
Yeah. So for me, I think being on the receiving end is just another maybe vulnerable spot,
Mm.
right? Just opening up and being an open book to whatever question comes your way. Because to your point, you can't really control the questions. I guess you could, but that's not about this show. It's just a
Yeah.
conversation, right? So I think it's being open and willing to sort of show whatever needs to come out, whatever flows in the conversation,
Hmm.
and then letting yourself be put out there. I think when we're having a conversation and I'm on this end of the microphone, it's not really about my work or my ability to host and have a great
Mm.
conversation with somebody. It's more about who I am and what I'm all
Yeah.
about.
Is that something that you find difficult to talk about publicly, like more about your origin story or getting into details about like your personal background?
It is. By nature, I think I'm relatively guarded for lots of reasons and tend to sort of keep it behind a wall. So starting a podcast was like complete opposite, right, of what you would think. But when I look back and I think about my youth and the things I loved and sort of how I got here, it was getting to a point, and maybe we'll get into this, but where I was taking a pause in my life and sort of evaluating a lot of things and realizing that I sort of had forgotten a lot of the things I love. And I think that happens to a lot of, I'll say, especially middle aged women. And I started to lean back into those things. And part of what I loved as a child and coming up through my middle school years and even high school, I loved AM talk radio. I was an AM talk radio junkie, which is so weird for a
Where did
kid,
you grow
right?
up? What city?
I grew up in Rhode
Okay, Rhode
Island,
Island. Okay.
partially in Pawtucket and then a town called Tiverton, but little old Rhode Island. But yeah, I loved things like that. I loved journalism and being on the newspaper and that kind of thing. So I think I started to take that pause and sort of remember those things that I love, and it led me here.
What was it about AM radio that you love so much?
I think it was a couple of things. So I think it felt kind of like podcasting. I think it felt very personal,
Yeah.
like they were talking to you,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And maybe that guy was just talking to you. That thing he said was directly at you, even though there could have been thousands or millions of listeners. But I also love learning in books and education, and I'm all about learning new things. So I'm guessing I was probably very interested as well in just kind of learning lots of different things, hearing about lots of different things.
Was podcasting your first foray into putting yourself out there in a public way?
Well, yeah, mostly. So for many years, for like 25, 26 years, I had a big team and I had a career, and it sometimes brought me to the stage to speak. I tried to prevent it as much as possible. I was not comfortable on the stage. I will tell you though, which is interesting that you're asking this, and now that I'm thinking about it, we kind of had a running joke that I was a client favorite anytime we were in a conference setting in a room. So sitting at a table could have been 50 people, but sitting at a
Yeah.
table, just having a
Yeah.
conversation, sharing what I knew, leading them in a certain direction, all about it, had no issue. Ask me to stand in front of that podium, not fun. I did not like it. So I guess I could correlate. It's pretty similar. Yeah, I would try to avoid it. I did it sometimes, but I would say going into podcasting was definitely the first time.
Did you ever take speaker training?
No. I did
Yeah.
not.
I mean, I took some years ago and I did it. I don't know that it necessarily takes the jitters away because I remember even after the training and going through those mock sessions and you're in front of a crowd and, I had my spiel about like I perfected like a 5 minute or 10 minute talk, whatever it was. And I remember going to a couple of podcast conferences and giving it. But the first time I was at one in Australia, this is We Are Podcast, and I gave the talk, and probably if you're watching from the audience's perspective, it looked like everything went fine without a hitch. But I
Right.
felt like I had a ball of cotton in my mouth, and it was just like, and I vividly remember like I'm here in front of my peers. A lot of these folks were like my friends. So and it was a very
Yes.
intimate setting. It wasn't a stage. It was we were all at the same level, and everyone was just at tables. So, but there is that something that doesn't go away, and I think it's one of the biggest fears that people have of this idea of like
Yeah.
either performing or speaking on stage. And there's something about, I think, the vulnerability aspect of it that really triggers some sort of, I don't know what part of the brain it is because I always get those mixed up, whether it's the
Flight and
yeah,
fight. I
the
don't
fight or flight and all that stuff,
Yeah.
that the mammalian instinct to say like,
Yeah.
I'm somewhere where I don't feel very comfortable. Yeah.
Right.
And
Run, run.
everything that does to it, the body, whether it's, you sweat in places you didn't really realize you sweat that much before or something. So, you just react differently to it. But it's interesting that you didn't have that
Yeah.
experience when you were at the table. So it's not I don't think it was
Nope.
a function of you not being well versed and being able to speak intelligently about a topic that you knew well or passionate about. It's just a
Yeah.
different dynamic, I think, when you're on a stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely. That's exactly right. Yeah. So, and some people I think can outgrow that, and some people will always be uncomfortable. And I think that's
Yeah.
okay. Part of one of my messages is that we need to learn to be more comfortable in the uncomfortable.
hmm
So that's okay.
So without getting into the full resume, what did or does the corporate journey look like for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, in a nutshell, for about, like I said, 25, 26 years, I worked at basically the same company. It was the same company, multiple
Yeah.
roles, came, up through the
Yeah.
ranks, and eventually I was a vice president and had a pretty big organization that was surrounded with support and development and product ownership for business applications used in the financial
Okay.
industry. And then in 2021, after multiple acquisitions that our company went through right after the other,
Yeah.
just wasn't aligned with the company that I felt I would have retired at,
Mm,
but no longer was in alignment. And, we parted ways. And that was, at the time, both devastating and
yeah.
liberating. It really gave me the opportunity to reevaluate a lot of things.
I went through a similar experience. I was in corporate for 20 plus years. I worked in the marketing departments, and you kind of assume that may just be the rest of your life. And coming from, I'm a child of
Yeah.
the 80s. So, your parents instill in you the importance of like having that steady job, working for a big company. There's some cachet that goes with working. I worked at JP Morgan Chase, like I said, and E-Trade. And so, they're prominent companies in the financial space. But there was always like a pull. There was always, I don't know if I would call it an entrepreneurial pull or a desire to do something else. And I just couldn't like put my finger on it. And I tried several times and then came back with my tail between my legs and would ask for like my job back, or just thankfully I had my corporate godfather to lean on, and he was able to kind of line things up for me. And so it's always been helpful to have those relationships. But I think that it's a bit jarring to move into that other world. And I notice it a lot when you think about people preparing their LinkedIn profiles. When you're in the corporate world, like the only time you look at your LinkedIn is when you're getting ready for a new job.
You're looking for,
That's
yeah.
about it. And
Yeah. And yeah. No, I was just going to add, just to be completely transparent, I am in another corporate
yeah,
job at this
yeah, yeah,
point. So I do work fully. I have a day job, but I've moved to individual contributor
yeah,
role. I am in program management and just have a different work-life
yeah.
balance. And so things are different in that way. So I'm able to still enjoy things on the side where I wasn't able to do that before.
But it sounds like something shifted when that happened, when that transition happened internally for you, because you talked about it or even referred to it as a midlife crisis. And I think we all go through, I don't think we have one. I think we go through various milestones and for those of you that believe in like the astrology and the big returns of some of these planets, like some of these happen in bigger cycles, like 15, 25 years. So there's various things that happen that are shifting us in a way or nudging us to reevaluate like what our life is about and where we're headed. And if we are on the path that we're meant to be, and I think that's sounds like that's something that you went through. And I don't know if that's the timing related to starting the podcast, but maybe can you talk a little bit about that and internally what was happening in your world as you were going through that transition?
Yeah, I mean, I was going through so, of course, the separation from a job and a team that I grew from the beginning and had just surrounded myself with every day, every night, everything for that many years. It was my everything. It really was my everything. And like many, I was very focused on external validation cues and just that hamster wheel of what's next. And, you get one role and then you climb up for the next, and it just never ends, right? So when it came time and I had this pause, the separation, I actually took 6 months off. And at that same time, I was starting to go through a wellness journey. I lost a ton of weight. Like, to your point, I think there were a lot of things just shifting in me at the same time.
Mhm.
And I just started to really look at who am I and how did I get how did I get
Yeah.
here? I guess, I mean, I wouldn't have called it a midlife crisis, but I guess it's similar in that that's just a lot of self-reflection, a lot of how did so many years go by, and I'm 53. So how
As
did
am I.
50 years go by and get to this place,
Yeah.
right? And suddenly be like, wait, how did I get here? And where did all that time go? And when
Yeah.
did I make these
Yeah.
decisions? And by the way, who did I want to be? Because I don't know if, right? So I don't know if that's who I want to be or I wanted to be. And you can look back and everyone's life is like this. And this is really the genesis of my podcast. Life is messy and it's complicated and we can't predict it. And you make a series of choices based on what's going on. Like, you can't predict what's coming at you, and things happen,
Yeah.
and you make choices, and suddenly you find yourself here 50 years later, right? But
Yeah.
I took it as a time to really start looking at my values and how did I really want my priorities to stack up? I'd say things that were important to me, family,
Yeah.
as an example.
Yeah.
I would have always said it's very important to me. But the truth is, I put my job before my family a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that happens in climbing the corporate ladder in corporate America sometimes, right? So it was time to just sort of evaluate a lot of that stuff and say, between now and dead, what do I want it to look like? And do I want to do more of the
Yeah.
same or do something
Yeah.
else?
And I think what's important for the listener to realize is also to understand that there's no right time for this epiphany to happen. And there's no,
Yeah.
it's not like, and we should be gentle with ourselves in terms of how we came to this, what caused it,
Yeah.
whether it's something that's jarring. I've had some life-changing experiences when I've gone through a divorce and I've lost one of my best friends during COVID. And so there's moments where, that can shake you up. But sometimes it's the slow burn or it's the, the frog in the pot analogy
Yeah.
where, it's happening so gradually that get to a point where you're like, I don't really think there was anything jarring enough to provoke me to ask these questions. So I think it's helpful to be gentle on ourselves and be grateful that we do get the opportunity, because there are people who
Yes.
are on that, whether you want to call it a hamster wheel, who don't know otherwise and are very comfortable in the life that they have. And maybe if you ask them on their deathbed, they'll say, yeah, it was okay. But I think more and more people are waking up, and I see it happening more and more. All ages, all generations are going through that. So I'm curious for you how and when podcasting came on your radar and how you started to think about that this might be something that you could be interested in, having come from that, being in that corporate world.
Yeah. So I was a listener, but I mentioned I was sort of going through this period in my life where I was trying to get into a more healthy lifestyle. I had COVID was going on too. There was a lot of stuff going
Yeah.
on, right? So there was a lot of online community stuff. I had joined and become part of this wellness community. And I started sort of pseudo coaching and doing some things in that community, such as leading book clubs,
Okay.
inspirational and developmental, personal development book clubs.
Yeah.
And again, back to the things I love. I went to school for English and journalism. I did 0 things in my career with that
Yeah.
formally,
Yeah.
right? But that's what I went to school for because I loved it. And again, I started to really connect back with, gosh, I really enjoy this. And I started doing some author interviews in some of that. And I was like, this is fabulous. I love this. This is like, it really lit me up. I was finding stuff that lit me up. And so I started to just slowly think about what could I do to make that more my own versus doing it for somebody else in their community.
Yeah.
And also make it bigger, do something bigger. And in bigger, I don't mean just get to the masses. I mean bigger in that, not just be specific to books, but how do we connect with people, help people, give them inspiration, give them hope, share messages. It's all about that. We all have lots of experience we can share with one another. And so I sort of just slowly started, then I started doing research. I'm a researcher, I'm a learner. I started doing research and learning. And I didn't pull the plug for a while, probably a good, 8 months, just out of sheer, I didn't know all the answers and I was uncomfortable with going forward in that way, doing it messy.
Yeah.
I did eventually do it messy, but I had to get myself there.
Yeah.
I had to get myself through that first step of just doing it.
Did you have a vision for what you wanted the show to be?
I did. A loose vision, right? I struggle with, there's a ton of advice out there from probably the masters of podcasting that will tell you to niche down to a very specific thing. And I still to this day, going in now almost 2 years, and I can't say that I'm really niched down where those people would probably be happy with me. Because my vision for it was to get in that spot of life's messiness, that area of unique experience, but yet shared experience. We all, to your point, we all have these moments in our lives that come up, and it's not about those moments because they're going to come up for everybody, but it's about what did you do about it? Who did you lean on? Any lessons learned that you can share with the next guy? So it's about providing some maybe fast pass to somebody else that's going through the same thing, or inspiration for somebody that maybe thinks they can't get through it. And you can kind of show them that you can get through it. So it was more that, let me go after that age demographic like myself, women in the middle, but also help to find those messages in the middle of books and stories and people's experiences that we could share across the board.
I love it.
So that was my loose thought.
I love the Fast Pass reference. That's the toll
Disney or something.
The Toll Express tool. Yeah. And I grew up in New York, so New England is probably the same thing. So for the benefit of the listener, that it's the express payment system on the toll.
Yes. Well, I think Disney too had a fast pass, right? You don't have to wait in the lines. But you're right. Either one. The point is, you don't have to figure it all out yourself. Maybe somebody can give you, hey, if you do step 1, 2, 3, 4, you can get to 5 faster. You know what I mean? That kind of
Were there
thing.
shows that you were listening to that were inspiring at the time, or helping you understand, or making you realize that maybe there was perspective that you could take that was different from theirs?
No, I don't think I could say that I would say no, because even to this day, I'm kind of all over the place. So I have a few favorites. They're going to be people in this genre. I love Mel Robbins. Everybody loves Mel Robbins. I love Glennon Doyle and that whole crew. That's kind of my genre of what I love in personal too. So, but I can't say that I had anything, and I jump all around a lot. So I can't say that there's any one thing that was like, I was listening to this and this is what I want to emulate, or I was listening to this and I don't want to do that. That wasn't really, no, I can't say that.
But definitely books have been an influence. So are there a couple of personal development favorites of yours?
There definitely are. I would say some of my favorites in general topic or just across the board would be like Atomic Habits, I love that as a point of reference for people that are sort of trying to just frame up how to have it impact your life and how do you change habits and the slight edge, Jeff Olson,
Mm,
consistency. I think it falls in that same genre, but
yeah.
consistency, one talks more about habits and the framework around habits and creating them and breaking them. And the other is more, I think, leans a little bit more towards how consistency plays in. And that's really important. Dr. Joe
Yeah.
Dispenza, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself.
Mm.
That one I love just because it's about learning to come off autopilot, which was part of my whole sort of awakening, if you want to use that word that everybody's using, but just kind of waking up to what's reality and being more present in my own life. Like most of us, to your point, there's a bunch of people that never even think
Yeah.
about coming off that hamster wheel and waking up. And I think for me, that book is all about being more present, coming off autopilot, really recognizing what's going on in your life. And so I really love that.
As you think about that last one, the term autopilot's interesting because I think concept of it is that people don't recognize that they're on
Yeah.
autopilot. So have you had in the course of your conversations and on the podcast, are there ways that people can maybe ask themselves if they're on autopilot, if they're not aware that they are?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of ways, right? There's lots that you can read a zillion books and you can find lots of techniques, but there's simple things to just start recognizing whether or not you're being more present
Yeah.
and or get more present. And that's when I think you start being able to distinguish between the two. Simple things like for some of us, I mean, just think about, have you ever driven home from work or to a place and gotten there and said, "Hey, did I go through that
Oh,
stop?
yeah.
Did I," like, not even knowing how you got there,
Oh,
right?
yeah. 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 I've
I
done
see
that.
you
Yep.
laughing. So you've done
Yeah.
that. I've done that too. How did we do that? We were literally on
Mm,
autopilot,
yeah.
autopilot, right?
Before Tesla.
Because we drove. Yes, but we drove, I don't know, however many miles. For me, my commute was long, so say an hour, 50-ish miles. And to not even
Yeah.
know that how you made it, that is
Yeah.
autopilot, right? So if anybody's had that happen to them, or I think looking at how many times do you like get through the day and think about not even kind of remembering a certain
Mm.
conversation, or I'm not talking like we're old and we're doing,
Yeah. It's not yeah. We're not
you
talking,
forget
yeah,
something.
forgetfulness.
I'm talking like you really weren't really there. Like somebody was standing in front of you and you
Yeah.
were multitasking and you weren't really paying, you were
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Like, so there's definitely signs there. And I think you can teach yourself to do things to be more present pretty easily. Like if you go on a walk, this is a pretty easy one, but if you go on a walk or drive or whatever, tell yourself to notice certain things like the color of the house
Mm-hmm.
or find the numbers on the mailbox, anyone that has a number 5, and I'm just making that up, but
Yeah.
something to really pull you to pay attention. And then I think you'll start noticing the difference and you can start really picking up on those things.
So let's turn back the clock to you getting the podcast together because it's helpful for folks that are listening that may have just started a show, are thinking of starting a show. There's the gamut here. I just interviewed Dave Jackson, who's been podcasting probably over 13, 14 years, so maybe longer. So it's always nice to see the range. But what did you have in mind
Yeah.
in terms of, did you know it was going to be interview based to begin with? And how did you go about like getting your first guests? And I'm curious because it's always
Yeah.
an interesting experience. And I went through it 10 years ago when I started this show, but I'm in this day and age, and there's no shortage of information available to your point. You can watch, there's hundreds, if not thousands of YouTube videos
Yeah.
on podcasting, which can be overwhelming, but I'm curious how you
Right.
found your way through that maze of information to get started and what that vision early on was for what you wanted to do.
Okay. So a couple things in the answer to that. I did envision including interviews and that being a primary focus. And honestly, I'm still more comfortable. Actually get a lot of feedback that people like my solo episodes, but I'm more comfortable still doing the interviews. So that's a stretch area for me that I'm working on. But so in my head, I knew I wanted to do a mix. I wanted to do some book review kind of episodes that would be solos. I wanted to just be doing some personal life lessons and reflection type episodes, and then but be primarily interview based. I did take a course, a quick course, like a 6-session course on starting podcasts. So that definitely helped give me, because there's some, to your point, you can get everything out there. There's so much information. You can go on YouTube and find everything. But there's also a million opinions. So trying to narrow down just low budget. How do you start with a decent microphone, low budget? What platform do you pick? Those kind of things. You just, it's nice to have a personal connection and then have somebody sort of give you a list or a cheat sheet
Yeah,
again that you
yeah.
could just kind of check off and get started. So that was how I sort of framed up the technical side of it. As far as getting guests and stuff, I guess, again, back to my personal nature, I'm a researcher. So I am always out there looking at TED Talks, looking at books that come
Yeah.
out, looking at just listening into like what people are talking about. And then I'll reach out and I'll start trying to narrow down who that person is. Or if I have a specific segment, like I was doing a series on grief. So I put, some things out there and said, hey, I'm doing a series on grief. I'm looking for some experts. And then I do a ton of research on people and I listen to what they've got out there. I meet them and talk to them and see if they're a good fit. And it's important to me to have people that I feel a authentic connection
Okay.
with and that align with who I am, who the show is, what it's about. So for me, that's important. So I do that. So I think that's how I got started and that's what framed it up. I would say what I wasn't prepared for is really how much work it
That sounds familiar, yeah.
is. It's a lot of work, right? I think people maybe don't realize that it's a lot of work. And sure, you can hit the button and record on your cell phone and just post it somewhere and done. But if you want to do that research and do the prep work that I'm talking about, and you want to edit and and you don't have a budget to outsource that, or you don't want to outsource all that, there's a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah, yeah. And so what were those early interviews like for you?
They were great. No, honestly, when I look back, I'm not there yet, maybe. And, I don't know,
Yeah,
at some point I'll look back and go, eek.
yeah.
I do that more on the solo episodes than I do the interviews. I think for the most part, I would say there's a handful that I probably would say, maybe I didn't, this guest wasn't the best one or whatever for what I wanted to portray. But I don't think, I wasn't really nervous. I can't say I was nervous. I think it was fine. I had done my research. I had met the person. We get on, we have a conversation. So I don't, I think they were okay. I think they were exhilarating. I still feel that way. I still get
That's
excited
a good
about
feeling.
meeting somebody. Yeah, right. And that's part of why I still do it,
Yeah.
right? I think being able to connect with somebody and learn something and then be able to kind of curate that for other people and then have people come back and say, wow, that was really helpful, or I got this, or that really lifted me, whatever the message is. That's exciting to me.
How many episodes are you up to now?
88,
Okay,
89.
yeah, that's a lot. Do you notice any difference in how you are as a host with your 80th versus maybe your first few? Like, do you notice the improvement? I know it's hard when you look back and you're just trying to see. It's hard to measure looking back, but then
Yeah.
do you feel a difference in how you conduct these interviews now, different than when you started?
So I feel that I'm a little bit more, and this is about me personally as a whole. I've been working on this, but I'm a little bit less worried about having so much thought around what I want to come out of the conversation and
Mm,
being invested in the end and more free form. I mean, I still always will have a framework. And again, I've met with the person, I've done research. I know the areas I want to touch on with a specific
sure,
person,
sure.
but I think I'm a little bit more comfortable just winging it and saying, again, still knowing who I'm talking to
Yeah,
and
yeah,
what
yeah.
the general topic is, but really just kind of winging it.
Has your personal journey changed? Because you talk a lot about this idea of living a balanced life. You talk, a lot about gratitude. Is your journey evolving as a result of you starting the podcast and you having the conversations and maybe some aha moments as guests reveal something that is relevant in your life? I'm curious how it's affected you in your personal life
Chicken and
and
egg.
your personal growth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. So I think I was, not I think, I for sure was already on this journey before I started, having the podcast. And I think I already have some understanding of many of the topics that I'm going to talk about, but for sure, they're bringing expertise to the table. That's not my everyday day job. So, of
Hmm.
course, they're going to bring new ideas and things that either solidify what I'm thinking or I have a thought about or where I'm going, or kind of give some specific tactical ways to do certain things that I haven't heard before that I can really use myself, but also share with others. So I think, listen, I think the personal development, for the best of us, I think the personal development journey, it doesn't end. It just
Yeah.
goes
Yeah. Yeah.
on, and you're going to constantly be in this evolution. So I think it goes hand in hand. I think I'm changing. I think I learn as I'm going. I'm learning outside of the podcast, but I'm learning within the podcast as well. So I think it works well together.
And do you find that your relationship to taking imperfect action has changed as well, coming from
Oh, God.
that background you have? Obviously, you had a leadership position, you led a team, and it's
Yeah.
hard to not feel like you always have to have the answers, because I've lived through that period as well.
Yeah, for sure. This was literally the first thing I did. What I'll say messy. That's not my phrase, right? I didn't coin that
Yeah.
phrase, but doing it messy. I think just starting, even though I didn't have all the answers, this was definitely the first foray into that. But I've definitely been doing a lot more of that
Yeah.
and living a lot less planned, a lot less, again, focused on the outcome. Well, that's a change I've been implementing in myself, and it shows up here and it shows up in my personal life as well.
And then how do you take everything that happened, the transition, the podcast, the conversations, what you're learning throughout this process, and then how does that color like how you see the world on a daily basis and how you develop gratitude for everything that's been happening along this journey?
Yeah. I mean, it changed everything. It colors everything vibrantly. I can't say I really felt gratitude for a whole lot of things before all this started. And now I can't say that a day goes by that I don't feel some kind of gratitude without,
Yeah.
it's noticing the small things. It can be the smallest thing in your day, but really being able to pick up on the what you have and what's there and what you're joyful for and thankful for versus what you don't have or what you're
Hmm.
trying to get. It's just a big shift. Such a big shift. I'm just so thankful for so many things. Just dumb stuff, right? I can be in the grocery store with my husband and there's people complaining about how expensive everything is. And, my immediate default response is, I'm thankful we can afford it.
Yeah. Yeah, of
How many
course.
people
Yeah.
can't,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that's a
That
shift,
is a
right? I
shift.
mean, just to naturally have your brain go to that spot, that's a shift. So I think it colors everything.
Have your friends and family and people that are close to you, have they seen the shift?
Yes, so much. A good example of that is, so I host the holidays
Yeah.
for my family. I'm always the one. So somewhere between 15 and 30 people, depending on the
Wow.
holiday, right? But again, if I go back historically, I'm the planner, the over planner. Everything has to be right. We have to have a list for everything, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward to just this year, and I was doing something, and I don't remember specifically the topic, but I just kept saying, it's whatever. It'll be fine. I don't care. It'll all work out, whatever. And my husband literally looked over and he goes, man, you really have changed. Because I was just so comfortable in the fact that it's not important
Yeah.
or whatever. It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. But yeah, that's different. So yes, people do notice.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Coming from the corporate background, I always think about like, we get into this like end of year planning, budgeting,
Yeah.
forecasting, the finance team comes in, they're like, okay, what's your, budget? And especially if you're managing teams, head count, like all this jargony
Yes.
stuff that just I'm kind of like squirming, like thinking back all the things, we would have to think about back then. But you don't have that at that scale with your show as well. But you do have that in maybe that planning perspective, that future looking perspective. Where do you see this going and what do you envision for your show? One of my favorite questions for my coaching clients is, if we were to have this conversation 12 months from now, what would need to happen with your progress for you to be like happy with where you are?
So great. I've been debating what my word for the year is
Mm,
going to be for 2024 because I'm holding a virtual vision board session for my community on Sunday.
yeah.
And one of the things that I always do to frame up that vision board is kind of come up with that my word of the year, right? And then kind of plot in my goals and stuff around. So I was, of course, giving this some thought like I do every year. And for this, for the podcast, I think a couple of things. So I do want to focus on a couple areas that I have thought about, but I haven't dipped my toe
Okay.
in. Again, just not knowing enough. It's silly things, tactical things, but it also feeds into the strategy of growth, right? So I want to get on YouTube. I'm not yet. So I need to take those
Yeah.
steps and do that. I want to start guesting more. Here I am.
Check
Because I
that box.
know it's no, one and done is not the way. But I think, no, seriously, I think we both know one of the biggest pieces of advice people would give around growth is get out there more,
Yeah.
get on different shows,
Sure.
get some
Sure.
exposure,
Sure.
right? And so I need to do that.
Yeah.
I need to push myself to do that, even though it's uncomfortable. So there's a couple of things like that will help me say that I'm making the strides. For me, this is definitely a long game.
Mm-hmm.
My vision, you asked my vision at the beginning. So my vision for this was this is going to be something that I use to leverage when I retire from my day job, right? So I know, yes, everybody in, I'll get in trouble for saying this, but everybody and their brother's a coach
Oh,
these
yeah, it's
days.
true.
But the reality
Yeah.
is everybody and their brother's a coach these days. But I also know that I grew and built teams for years and have naturally coached
Mm-hmm.
people for
So you know
years.
what
I
you're
mean, it
doing.
just comes very, very naturally to me.
Yeah.
And I have a community today, which, there's a lot of interaction and off on the side, unofficial coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I know someday I would like to do something more in that
Mm,
space. And the podcast is a great leverage to be able to get messages
yeah.
out and
Yeah.
connect with people. So I guess I sort of have a very short-term tactical plan. And then I have a very long-term, I would say not 3-year, but probably more like a 7 to 10-year plan
Okay.
in front of me. But yeah, so we'll see.
How did we get connected? Because I meant to ask you at the beginning, and because I know it's part of your obviously your outreach strategy, but I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
Amy Fagan,
Amy Fagan, that's
Grounded
right.
in
Yeah, yeah,
Maine,
Amy.
right?
Yes.
So I think you guys have a couple of
Yes.
connections and you interviewed her.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, when Amy was starting, she was coming up just slightly behind me and she was pinging some people trying to get information about how do you find guests and how do
Yeah.
you do sort of an intake. And I'm like, listen, I just got started and I don't think this artifact's going to be like prize winning, but here
Yeah.
you can have everything I've created,
Yeah.
and I shared my stuff with her. So we became
Yeah.
friends and are also in some of the same communities together. Yeah.
Amy's awesome. She's in we have a small community that meets on a regular basis to like help grow their show. So we've been
Yeah.
getting to know her a little bit better. But had her on a recent episode, which I'm sure you heard. And I
Yeah.
just love her energy and her enthusiasm for what she does for her show.
She's the biggest cheerleader. I just have
Yes.
to say, I always tell her that and tag her when people say anything because she cheerleads for everyone. Like anyone she believes in or gets behind. I mean, she is there
Yeah.
no matter what you do.
Yeah.
She is there to cheer you on. So I really value that and appreciate that in her. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that plan because a lot of times when people get started, and it's some of the conversations I have with new clients, because I have a podcast agency, we produce shows for businesses and for indies as well. And I've been more conscious of asking them what their vision is for the show. Because you could have it as a hobby and there's nothing wrong against that. But you should understand the inherent challenges that come with that and know that it's going to be bootstrapped and it's going to be fun if you have it as a side project or something you want to do. Like, that could be your hobby. Podcasting can be a hobby.
Yeah.
But for others,
Yeah.
folks, and who have a long-term vision of where they'd like to be, or who know that they have a skill set that would be applicable for their audience or their community, I think it is important to think through. One of the first things I've been conscious of now as we start new shows is asking them, who's the sponsor for the show going to be? And in many cases, it's going to be themselves. It's going to be them
Yeah.
highlighting like something that they do, reminding listeners that they work with people. There's a way to work with me if you're interested, or I do have a community, or I do have events, or I do, even if it's an email
Yeah.
list, just something. So
100%.
you're always reminding them like, hey, this is, how I support the show. Here's what's happening in my world. And we use a tool called Captivate for our hosting, and they make dynamic ad insertion pretty easy, which I've been pushing a lot. So now you can just run a promo all the time for your stuff. And I think it's really important to be thinking through that, because it is nice to know that at some point, that you're building up an audience that you can take with you wherever you go, and it's not dependent on the whims of a social media platform. So
Yeah.
to giving it some thought, and kudos to you for, kind of thinking about that. And even like if you said it is a long-term 3, 5, 7 year plan, it's important that you have that vision. And you did mention your communities. I'm curious, that's something that's really a prized possession for most podcasters, to know that they have one, and then that they are able to engage with them, because it's just, without our listeners, we wouldn't have a show. Like if otherwise we'd just be like out, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's there, it doesn't make any sound,
Is
right?
anyone listening?
So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about
Yeah.
what that journey has been like for you, in terms of
Yeah.
first recognizing that you had engaged listeners, and how that grew into a community for you.
So I probably did it opposite everybody else, and I started that community first. So again, I'm a planner, and I knew I wanted to I wanted to do that. I wanted to have the ability to connect with people. And for me, that was a large part of it. But I also knew I didn't want to try to master all the social media algorithms and platforms. And again, you teach this stuff, so it's probably against the grain of what most teach, in that that's where you're going to get a lot of your lifts, do your connections, hit as many of them as you can. But again, as a hobby, I'm going to say I started it as a hobby, right? It'll shift, but at this point, it's a hobby for me. In knowing that, I had to set my mindset around, where is my biggest bang for my buck, and do I want to spend the time, and where are my listeners most? And I'm not going to try to do it on 12 different places, because I know I would get burned and it would become too much of a quote unquote a job. It would become too much of a job or too much of a hassle. And I wasn't looking for that. I need to stay in love with it to keep it up for 7 to 10 years, right? I mean, to your point about bootstrapping, if I'm paying for it all and I'm doing all the work, right? I'm not outsourcing at this point. I'm doing it all.
Yeah.
You got to love it.
Yeah.
You really do got to love it. People need to hear that. I mean, you have to love what you're doing in some aspect, either the connection or just the ability to get your voice out there or whatever it is, but you got to love it, because it's going to take a lot. And so, yeah, for me, it's all about just going with it at this point and sticking with it, because I love that connection, and the community allows me to send out daily messages, connect when I have an event going on, get feedback from people about episodes, etc.
So what's that community look like on a practical basis, and how do you stay connected with them?
Yeah. So it's still growing, right? I'm not out here to pretend that it's 12 million
No, it
big.
doesn't have
It's
to be. It
just,
could be
it's a growing
12.
community. Well, it's bigger than that, but so it looks like, I at least put out a post every day, something that's provocative in thought in some of the areas of focus
Mm-hmm.
that we tend to kind of zoom in on.
Yeah.
Best case is you have people who are, which typically does happen, you have people who are commenting on it, and, maybe there's some conversation around
Are you
it.
doing that in a Facebook
And
group?
yep,
Okay.
it's in a Facebook. So sorry, practical sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in a Facebook
Okay.
group. So it's in a private Facebook
Yeah.
group, which I honestly don't know if I made the right choice there or not, but I made that choice very thoughtfully, very intentionally, because I wanted it to feel like a safe place where people could comment and people could have a conversation, and not have their neighbor Joe be able to hear or see what they're saying. And
Well, they're sensitive topics too. I mean, if they want to, like, that's it, having that
sometimes,
safe space, and just from this conversation and understanding how you're talking about changes and transitions and crises, and inevitably you can't touch on these topics without them venturing into, sensitive areas and triggering things for people, and then people,
yeah,
having to work through like why they made the decision, why they took so long to make the decision, or like feeling alone in making the decision. And I think making it private, I think, was absolutely the right call, because what you're communicating there is that you respect your listeners in a way that you value, that their ability to participate in a way that's going to respect their privacy. So I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So practically that's what it's a Facebook group, and it's a private Facebook group. And then I also try to do so we were doing like the holidays we took a pause, but multiple book clubs throughout the year. So we do multiple book clubs, virtual book clubs, and people can sign up and for a very small fee participate in a group book club where they're getting prompts and again thought provoking things that would go along with the readings we're doing, and I frame it up in what we're reading each week, and then there are meetings and we can kind of go over what everybody's thoughts were on it. So typical book club format, and then other things throughout the year, like I'm doing the virtual vision board session, and it's just a freebie for everybody to come in and share your thoughts and
Yeah.
bounce ideas off each other and get together, the community to get
Yeah.
together and just try to do some impromptu things like that with whatever's going on.
That's fun. So a
Yeah.
couple of questions as we wrap up, and as you can see, it's it's pretty casual, and we're almost at the top of the hours. What is something you've changed your mind about lately?
So I did an episode on this. The thing that's jumping into my mind is it's silly, but it's pretty important to me is planning around
Oh,
vacations.
okay.
So for years and years and years, I was the girl with a very detailed bulleted list of itinerary from minute to minute of what we're going to do on
Yeah.
vacation, along with trying to be a little bit more present and prioritize my time.
Mm-hmm.
I made some decisions lately, just in the last quarter of 2023, to try to be a little bit more loosey goosey and
Okay.
plan a trip and hit the big things, but not do the planning. So I would say less planning, more just going with the flow.
That's a good one.
So I changed my mind about needing to plan out every little detail in order to have a fantastic
That's
vacation.
awesome. And have you put it into practice on an actual vacation? Okay,
Yes.
good. And how did it
Yes,
turn
listen
out?
to my episode.
Okay, cool.
I did.
We'll make sure that there's a link to that one in the show notes as well. What is the most misunderstood thing about you?
Oh, I guess if I'm going to be fully
Yes.
transparent, people think that I'm very confident and outgoing,
Mhm.
and that's not true. Like I have to I'm forcing myself
Yeah.
to be out
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
but this is not, as I said, comfortable for me. So by nature, I think I'm an introvert.
Mm.
I think because of my career
Mhm.
and lots of things, I learned to be more of an extrovert, but I don't think it's my default.
Yeah.
So I think that people get that wrong.
I think you find that a lot in this community, in the podcasting space, but also in this like digital world where it's easy to maintain and have a presence without really engaging like on a consistent basis with people. But I do notice that as well. I thought that I used to be more extroverted, but I'll go to a podcast conference and after about the third or fourth day, I think I'm ready to like come back home and just
It's
yeah, a
overload.
little bit of overload. But I'm in the moment, I'm very socially active and like it's talking to everybody.
Yeah.
But I'm also been conscious of being more intentional with the people that I do connect with as well. So that's something that's been top of mind for me. But thank you for sharing that and I'm curious what your experience has been like in this conversation. And I don't know, did you say that this is actually your first one in terms of
No,
guesting?
it's not my
Okay.
first. No, this has been great,
Yeah.
honestly. And the reason I really was attracted to doing this is because you do offer, I think, a tagline, if you will, is a safe place, right, for podcasters to come on and talk and just have a conversation. And I felt that when I listened. Amy's was the
Yeah.
first episode. And then I've gone back and listened to a bunch and I feel that energy
Yeah.
and that vibe. And I wanted somebody that, I felt that same,
Good.
yeah, authenticity with. So I feel like this has been very just a conversation,
Yeah.
which is what you want to do. So thank you for
Okay.
that. I have done some others which made me shy away from it. And it was more like rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
And it's just
Not a fan of those.
hey, listen, I'm not knocking on anybody, but it's just not my bag. It's not where, it's not where I'm going to shine. So, yeah. So I guess my message and my lesson to myself is to just do it, but maybe be picky about it or be very cautious about how I do it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I want to also be conscious of like how I engage and remind people to get out there when I realize that I'm not doing it myself. So I need to, I've been thinking about putting an open call out to, Facebook and saying, if you've got a podcast, I'm making some slots available. So if you think I'd be a fit for your show, just let me know. that could open the doors wide open to just a whole range of shows,
It will.
to maybe five. But this is good because it's like, because I love giving back to the podcast community, and you never know what those could turn into. So I think I
Yeah.
might just do that. That might be the easiest way, I think, because of being visible in the space for a while, just see what people want to talk about. Because it's hard. It'd be easier than trying to go out and find specific shows and try to engineer it in a way. So I'm kind of, I may just leave it in the hands of the universe and see
What
what
happens?
happens and be able to report back. But thank you so much for reaching out. I always look forward to these conversations because I get to meet more of the podcasting community than, even if we were at a podcast conference, we'd have a couple of minutes while I'm like on the
Yes.
floor to chat a little bit. But these are really great opportunities for me to just get to know people. My girlfriend likes to say this ability to go narrow and deep as opposed to just wide and shallow, just saying hi to a lot of people. And I'm conscious of the fact that I'm, need to be more intentional with that. And that's why I really love these conversations. And I'm glad you're getting value from them. And I appreciate you being a listener as well, because I don't take that for granted, how much time people have in their days. And so that you're making time to listen to the episodes and that they're adding value. That's very good feedback for me as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for having me
Yeah.
on. This has been great.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So if people want to learn more about the podcast and your community and then maybe even possibly working with you, where's the best place for them to get started?
Yeah, messageinthemiddle.com. You can get to everything. So you can get to the podcast. You can get to that's the website.
Yeah.
You can contact me there, but you can find
Yeah.
everything there.
And my marketing hat kicks in, and I'm just really appreciative of that domain name. It's so clear, it's so easy to remember, and it's tied to the podcast. So that stuff makes my marketing heart sing. So kudos to you for getting that.
Oh, but I don't have my niche, Harry. I don't have my niche.
Well, I think in some ways there is a niche
I
there.
do.
Yeah. And I think your community would probably tell you you're doing a great job. So keep it up and looking forward to much success with your show.
Thanks again.
Okay.